Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a podcast exclusively designed to create more reproductive health awareness and discuss your fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Aimee. This episode is hosted by Lisa Schumann of Building Your Family podcast. She has graciously let us share it with you here on the Egg Whisperer Show, and you're going to get to hear all about the behind the scenes of the TUSHY Method, the Balls Method, and the Egg Whisperer diet. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And we encourage each of you to go check out the Building Your Family podcast. Let's get on to the show.
Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about donor conception, surrogacy, fertility treatment, and all the ways the modern family is built. I'm your host, Lisa Schumann. And today we have a fantastic and famous guest, Dr. Aimee, who is famous for some ways that she diagnoses patients, but I'm going to let her talk all about that. So welcome, Dr. Aimee. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lisa, thank you for having me. I'm not famous. I'm just slightly insanely passionate about educating people about fertility, and please call me Aimee.
Okay, Aimee. So could you tell us a little bit about some of your methods of diagnosing patients? Because it's so wonderful that you really feel so passionate and have such a vision about helping people not only have a better diagnosis so that they'll have a shorter path to parenthood, but also it helps them avoid some of the costs involved in trying over and over again and maybe doing some things needlessly that they don't need to. So tell us a little bit about that, how you got to that idea that that would be the best way to approach fertility treatment.
Absolutely. After over 10 years of practice, I got so tired of patients coming in and saying, I just don't know what's wrong with me. And they would tell me stories about them going to their OBGYNs, asking for a fertility workup, and they would come to my office with an HIV test and a blood count. I'm like, why does this keep happening? It should be easy. Getting a fertility diagnosis should not be complicated. And if someone's given the diagnosis of unexplained, it's truly untested infertility. There's no such thing as unexplained. Unexplained simply means no one has explained it to you. So I just sat down one night with my husband. He loves crosswords. And I said, okay, honey, listen. Okay, I'm going to tell you, these are the things that go into a fertility workup. He's also a doctor, different specialty. And I said, check your fallopian tubes, do an ultrasound of the uterus, check the sperm, do some hormone testing, look at some genetic testing. And he just sat there. He's like, shh. He's like, give me time. I'm like, okay. The next day, he's like, the TUSHY Method. And people thought that like it was a joke. They're like, don't you know that when you go to TUSHY Method online, it's like a line of toilets, and someone else is like, don't you know this is triple X porn? I'm like, this is even better.
Oh my gosh.
Because it seems like the only way we can get people's attention nowadays is if we, make it loud and maybe make it a little bit controversial or maybe a little sexy. Not that the TUSHY Method's sexy, but we are talking about making a baby after all. So that's really it. They're the 5 steps that every fertility patient should make sure that they have to get to a diagnosis. And it's truly tubes, uterus, sperm, hormones, and your genetics. So if people can then take that information, go to their OBGYN and say, can you check my TUSHY? I would hope that, maybe in my lifetime, people would be like, yes, I know exactly what that means. And I can get these tests done for you. Because like you said earlier, Lisa, if you have a diagnosis, then you know what your treatment options are. And then you know what your pregnancy rate is for each treatment. Then you can choose the right treatment path for you based on the family size that you want. And every family looks different, and that's okay. And it's just important to know what your options are from the beginning. I don't want to hear stories of 5 years later, I found out that my husband has no sperm, or 5 years later, I found out me and my husband, one of us had a translocation. I want people to know when they are first trying to conceive what their story is from the beginning, rather than having heartbreaking stories of pain and suffering along the way. I know that's part of the human experience, even when you get your TUSHY checked, but at least you won't have regret or having the information earlier.
Could you walk us through, somebody comes to your office and says, okay, what should I do first? Could you explain how that works?
Absolutely. So what I would say is, where are you in your menstrual cycle? And if you are not having periods, then I can induce a period if applicable. If you have a regular period, then what I would do is I sing to my patients. I say, when you see flow, you let me
Really?
know. You come see me by cycle day 3. Now, I just made that song up right now. Today, I will have a jingle and a commercial for the TUSHY Method. But you can literally get your TUSHY checked in one menstrual cycle. Your period starts, cycle day 3, you come in.
Yeah.
I'll do an ultrasound and all your hormones. I'll do your genetic carrier screening. And then I'll do an ultrasound looking at your uterus, ruling out fibroids, polyps, endometriosis, and I'll do an antral follicle count. Then cycle days 8 through 10, you can come back for what I call the gentle tube test with XM foam, also known as HYFOSY, HYFOSY. You can also do it via HSG, which is an X-ray test of your fallopian tubes. In the meantime, your male partner, if you have one, will then do a semen analysis. I have a mail order kit. You just have the kit delivered to your home. You do the test, you ship it back to the company, and they'll send results. By the time of your next cycle, we will know everything we could possibly know, as much as, information that could be available to us today about your genetics, about sperm, about your hormones. We'll know about your ovarian reserve. We'll know about your diagnosis. And then you can sit down with your doctor, me, and we'll have a chat. We'll talk about what have we learned since doing these tests? What options are available to us? So for example, if your fallopian tubes are blocked, trying naturally is not available to you. Doing IVF is your only option of growing your family. If you want to carry a pregnancy yourself or use your own DNA. If sperm is low, then you can talk about ways, and I hope you'll ask me about Ball's method.
I will.
Cool. So you can still try and improve sperm, but sometimes you cannot. And so that's another reason why you would need to do IVF. So I just want people to know, do you have to do IVF to grow your family? Yes or no? If it's no, what are those options? What are the chances? How many cycles should you do? At what point should you change and pivot to something else? And the other thing is I'm all about preserving your fertility. So I started egg freezing parties in 2014 to educate women about fertility preservation. And I also educate couples and independent mothers about fertility preservation through IVF, because an egg is a chance for an embryo, right? And it can take sometimes 6 to 10 eggs to get one healthy embryo, but an embryo is really a chance for a baby. So I talk to my patients about no matter what your diagnosis is, look at your age and how many kids you want and see if it still makes sense for you to preserve your fertility through either embryo freezing or egg freezing.
You brought up something so important just now, which I find that patients don't think about often. You said, think about how many children you want. And lots of times patients come in and they say, okay, I just want to get pregnant. I don't want to think about it again. And it's so hard to kind of think ahead. Well, my eggs will get older in a few years from now when I want to come back for baby numbers 2. So it's so great that you incorporate that into part of the process.
My relationships with people, I think, are lifelong. Once someone enters my life and I have that incredible honor of helping them grow their family, I want to look out for them. I want them to be amazing parents to as many children as they want to parent. So that's why I'm very nosy and I ask these questions and I want to get involved and I want to protect my families from heartache.
That's beautiful. Okay, so next is the Ball's method, another kind of racy term. So tell us a little bit about that. How does that work?
The Ball's method is basically same idea, but for guys. And it's all the things you need to think about if the sperm count is low. Let's go through them. B is for background genetics. So do genetic testing. And there are a number of different genetic tests a guy can do to figure out why his sperm is low. We have chromosome analysis, Y chromosome microdeletion, and carrier screening. There are more advanced genetic tests that I refer my patients over to a genetic counselor to do. But for the most part, those are the tests. In addition to that, you can also do advanced sperm genetic testing. And it's basically just like a semen analysis, but they're looking at the sperm a little bit differently. So they're looking at sperm DNA methylation and fragmentation. So this can all guide you as far as like what's going on, what fertility treatments you should consider, and potentially how you can improve things. So now we get to the A, and I don't ever look at the A. The A is anatomy. So if a guy wants to drop his pants in front of me, I'll be like, not me. that goes to the reproductive urologist. So we have great reproductive urologists in this country, and they're basically just like me in that they went to schools, they went to urology school, and then they did advanced training in guys with fertility issues. And that's basically what I did. I went to OBGYN school, and then I went to advanced training for helping people get pregnant. Reproductive urologists will be able to, let's say, do things I can't. I don't examine testicles. I don't do surgery on testicles, but they will. So what we're looking for, if the sperm count is low or the DNA fragmentation is high, from an anatomy standpoint, is something called a varicocele. It's like a varicose vein around the testicle. It's a dilated vein. It can transmit heat to the testicle. And as heat rises, it can affect sperm quality. The next thing is to look at labs like testosterone, FSH, estradiol, thyroid. Sometimes I look at hemoglobin A1C to rule out diabetes in a guy. All of these things can affect sperm quality. Then we talk about lifestyle. Everyone is smoking marijuana these days, except me. But marijuana, nicotine, alcohol. Alcohol is not as bad as people think. Binge drinking is what's really bad, but it's really the nicotine that really harms sperm DNA. So any type, vaping, hookahs, pouches, just throw that stuff away, please. For at least 2.5 months, I want people to think about their longevity as they're planning on becoming parents and just cut those habits out completely. But if you can't, it's okay. The other thing we talk about is lifestyle, in addition to just the things I mentioned, but is exercise, hydrating, sleeping well. And the last thing is sex and supplements. So that's the S of the balls. So there's a supplement list that I give to guys like Conception XR, fish oil, CoQ10, vitamin D. And then if there are problems in bed, I don't want to hear about it the morning of the egg retrieval that you can't get it up and we have a sperm emergency. I want to know about that. Remember, I'm nosy. So that's the S of the balls, is sex and supplements. So that's basically the balls method. So tushy is for the ladies, balls is for the guys. And then you put it all together and you basically have the Egg Whisperer diet. So the Egg Whisperer diet is basically my approach to IVF care, where the D is getting the diagnosis first. The I is making your IVF plan. The E is embryo transfer preparation, and the T is transfer. And the biggest thing nowadays, and I'm sure this is important to you too, Lisa, about embryo transfer preparation is make sure your relationship's intact. Ask yourself, are you still going to be together in 5 years? If there's a chance that you're not, and you already feel that before you make this baby or before you do IVF, just stop. Trust me. Stop and go back to maybe egg freezing. Get therapy, do couples therapy before you really move forward. And if you still want to move forward and if you still have that gut feeling that things aren't going to work out, look at your IVF consent forms. Make sure you're protected so that if you want to have a second baby, especially if you're doing this over the age of 40, you are legally allowed to.
Yes, 100%. And the same is true for known donors, as we know, right? There's so many more of them these days. You're probably seeing that in your practice as well. And so much of this, well, it's no big deal. We're best friends. We went to college together, so we'll be fine. And as we know, even in a marriage, 60% of couples end up in divorce. So there's no way to ensure that or to think about the future child, right? When people are going through this. So that's so important to include. I'm wondering, do you start with the men and the women separately or simultaneously? You do both of these methods together at the same time?
Absolutely. So even before onboarding, so it's a requirement for a guy to have a semen analysis on file and the woman to have her hormone levels checked at a minimum. And then after the initial consult, I see what's missing from my checklist and then we order the tests. And then that way we have a diagnosis as soon as possible and can come up with a plan. Most patients seeing me, I joke, as you can tell, I'm very funny, or at least I think so, that I specialize in ovarian first aid, fertility first aid, or ovarian life support. So most people aren't coming to me because they're just curious about their fertility and they just want to see what's going on and get maybe start fertility pills. I see patients who've done like 6, 7 IVF cycles and they're coming to me because I'm their last hope before they start thinking about other options. Certainly I have patients that are fertility curious. There's no doubt about that. But my point is that a lot of times when people are already seeing me, much of the work has been done. I just usually want some updated labs if they haven't been done in the last 6 months to a year.
And how do you feel about supplements? People are very often on the internet talking about, well, if you take this supplement, you'll rejuvenate your eggs, or if you do this thing, it'll make your eggs recruit faster or something. Then people are always concerned with trying the next best thing. You mentioned CoQ10, which universally people feel comfortable with, but what about all of these other supplements that are out there?
I mean, I want sperm to sparkle and I want eggs to sparkle. And supplements don't necessarily work for everyone or help everyone, but they cannot hurt. And the supplements that I have my patients take are, I think, well studied. And I have seen scenarios where a patient did 3 cycles over the age of 40, not a single healthy embryo, or even a blastocyst. Then she takes this supplement, and I'll share with you what that is. And then all of a sudden she has 3 healthy embryos and she's 43. And it's like, that should not have happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the supplements I tell my patients to take is nicotinamide riboside, and it increases NAD levels in our body, and NAD levels start to go down at age 30. And that is what seems to cause more chromosomal abnormalities in our eggs. So repletion of NAD in our cells can help make your eggs more useful, possibly. Sure as heck won't hurt. I've been taking it for at least 6 years now. I take high doses just because I take it just for longevity reasons. It helps with my mood. It helps with my appetite, helps with my sleep.
Wow.
So that's one. The other one is CoQ10 and then melatonin. And depending on what conditions the patient has, if she has endometriosis or PCOS, there are going to be other things that I recommend that she takes. That's kind of how I talk to patients about supplements. Like, I want to support your egg quality. I don't know that it's going to improve it, but it's not going to hurt it.
Wow. That's fascinating. And is this an oral medication or supplement that someone takes?
Nicotinamide riboside can be taken both orally, as a pill, as a powder, as a injection, and as an IV infusion. So those are NAD shots, infusions that you can take. True Niagen is the company that makes the one I take, but there are certainly other companies that do it as well.
That's incredible. Well, I'm sure our audience is thrilled to hear about anything that can be helpful. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what about this explosion of popularity with other supplements like growth hormones or IVIG and all these other things that people are really kind of hot about these days?
IVIG isn't something that helps with egg quality, but I know what you mean. It's more about, preventing miscarriage or improving implantation. I don't utilize IVIG in my practice. I've had maybe a handful of patients use it. I have never had a patient get pregnant and then say, oh, it must have been that IVIG. So I don't feel strongly, and I don't feel strongly that this is a tool that I need to use in my toolbox. It's been around since I've been in practice. It's not new. Same with HGH. I've been using it since 2005. I use it on almost everybody, unless you're an egg donor or let's say a young woman with blocked tubes, because a lot of my patients might have egg quality issues. I want to go into treatment saying I've addressed all the possible issues. I don't want to do an IVF cycle and say, well, next time, since we learned, just like I had a hunch about, this could have been an egg quality issue. Next time we'll add this. For me, I want there not to be a next time. I know sometimes there are a lot of next times, and then the next time, and the next time, and the next time. But if I can minimize the tries by adding something like HGH, I'll consider it early on.
I think that's music to people's ears, Aimee, because as you know, people often go through that and it's the next time and the next time. And then by then their eggs just keep getting older and they have more and more difficulties. So it's not helping anyone. And what about for men? Are there supplements for men also?
Yeah. I mean, there's a Conception XR is from Theralogics. I really like that one. CoQ10, fish oil, vitamin D, but a guy can literally take his wife's or partner's prenatals. And most women who are trying to get pregnant are usually taking CoQ10. So you don't really need to buy separate supplements for a man. Prenatals are just a multivitamin dressed up. So there's no reason why a guy can't take it.
And what about embryo screening like PGTA? People are going backwards a little bit with that these days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it going backwards. I think people are finally more knowledgeable that your embryos could be marked as abnormal and you could be lied to. And don't allow yourself to be cheated out of the opportunity of transferring a normal embryo. Make sure you know if your embryo is mosaic, it's high or low, if it's segmental, chaotic. Like these are embryos that are probably perfectly normal a lot of the time. So I find that doctors and clinics are finally being more transparent with their patients. It's not across the board, but it's certainly getting better. So I always tell patients, you're not going to lose embryos going through this process with me as your doctor, because you're going to have all the information about your embryos. We're going to use genetic screening as a way to prioritize them. And even if an embryo is labeled abnormal, we can still transfer it because it doesn't mean that this is 100% correct. But not every clinic has that approach to care. And I can comfortably do this because I've knowingly transferred abnormal embryos for patients. Their request, it's not like I did it unknowingly. They requested their embryos transferred to me so that I can move them to the lab so that I can do the transfers. And I have had healthy pregnancies, perfectly healthy babies and children now from doing that. So that's why I feel very strongly that every embryo should be given a chance if a patient wants to be given the chance to transfer that embryo. We as physicians should not be allowed to say no to a patient who wants to transfer an embryo. That is theirs.
That's so interesting. And I think it's so interesting in the scope of our practice because when I started 2.5 decades ago, there was no such thing as a blastocyst anyway, right? People were transferring these young embryos anyhow, and nobody thought about that. Success rates weren't as good, but people got pregnant. It's so interesting. We've kind of lost sight of that a little bit.
Totally. I mean, it really wasn't until probably 2011 that across the board, most clinics were comfortable doing blast culture.
Yeah. And now we've kind of forgotten what our history. So what do you see that patients have the most trouble with, the patients that you see when they come into you and say, I really need help because I'm having whatever it is? Is it usually older eggs?
Yeah, it's ovarian aging. It's heartbreaking to see, they're young, healthy women who have run out of eggs, but their desire to have a healthy baby does not run out. And men don't experience that. And so I see conflicts with the couples because the husband doesn't understand. And then he won't, quote unquote, allow her to use egg donation, which I find incredibly cruel for a woman in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think ovarian aging is one of the hardest things that a woman can deal with. And sometimes it happens before you think you're old. So I'll have a patient, I'm 44, I'm ready. And I'm like, but you're in menopause and that's normal. Wait, what? I'm like, oh, how did you not know this? And the comments I get are, well, my mom didn't go into menopause until she was 50. I'm like, that doesn't matter. Every woman who says, I want to have a baby and you are 40 needs to also be open to other ways of having a baby without your eggs. Because most women over 40 cannot do it because that's how our bodies were made. And it has nothing to do with the gluten-free diet you've been following. You can't put Botox in your ovaries.
Well, it's great that you're out there talking about all of these things, Aimee, because I think that, and you probably experience this too, that people don't know, right? I mean, in your 8th grade health class, nobody talks about how your fertility declines. They just teach you how not to get pregnant. And nobody goes to their gynecologist for their annual pap smear and has a talk with their doctor about, you've got to start thinking about your eggs aging. It just, it's not happening, universally yet. So I think it's so great that you're out there on so many platforms talking about this because women do need to know the truth so they can arm themselves with this information.
Right. I feel like I need to do a recording for every woman. When she hits 21, you should listen to my voice. This is Dr. Aimee. Let me tell you what you need to know. And then again at like 32, and then again at 37, then again at like 43, and then again at 48. And I'll be warning you about all those things. And so that you're not like taken by surprise. Like my patients were like, I don't understand. My periods, I'm getting them every 2 months. And I'm like, and I'm feeling hot. I don't know what's happening. Is this cancer? I'm like, no, you're 48. Like that's normal. That's perimenopause. These kinds of things shouldn't be a surprise. They shouldn't catch us by surprise. They shouldn't cause us panic or require emergency visits to the OB/GYN when they're expected.
Absolutely. And we plan for everything else in life, right? Our careers, everything else, except for our families, unfortunately.
I know, but I hope to change that.
And what do you think about that, about preserving your fertility? If someone says, I'm thinking about freezing my eggs and I'm 25 years old. When should I do this, Dr. Aimee? What would you say?
I would say, let's look at your family history. Let's look at your fertility levels and just see what's going on. And then we'll come up with a plan. We'll talk about when you think you're going to have your first child, maybe your second child, and see what makes sense for you. So for some 25-year-olds, they don't need to like rush and do it right away. Like they can wait till they're maybe 30. But there's some 25-year-olds, their moms went into menopause at 40. So it definitely makes sense for that 25-year-old to do it, especially if she has a personal history of, let's say, endometriosis or fibroids. The truth is, the younger you are, the more viable your eggs. I mean, this is why when we look for egg donors, we look for women who are under the age of 28. Of course, there are exceptions, and we do, cycle women who are 29 or 30. But the reason is because we know that your eggs are mostly viable when you're under the age of 28. So if you can freeze by 28, great, but it doesn't mean that your eggs aren't going to be good if you freeze at 32 or 33 or 36 or 37. And when egg freezing first was a thing, people were doing it as a reaction to not finding the man and still being like, having fertility levels that were okay, but not great, or as a reaction to having bad levels. Like my FSH is now 13. Not that that's bad. Don't get me wrong. Or my AMH is 0.3. I'm going to freeze my eggs. But people were just unfortunately freezing bad eggs, right? Most of the time.
Yeah.
So things have changed, which is really great, where people are like, I'm going to freeze good eggs when I still have them. And this is not about a man. Egg freezing is not about men anymore. It used to be, but it used to be, I'm freezing my eggs so they can't find a man. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously? Like, can't we just get the man out of this conversation? It's really about, I'm freezing my eggs to give myself options. That's it. Preserve my fertility.
To be proactive. And do people ask you, I would imagine, well, how many egg cycles should I freeze? Is one enough?
Yeah, it just depends on your age and how many eggs you have. So what I tell patients is, look, things can happen. I mean, you can freeze your eggs and then something can happen. They don't survive the thaw. So I always say, number one, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't thaw them all at once. Number two, if let's say you froze your eggs at 25 and now you're like 35 and you still haven't started your family, freeze another batch just in case, something happens with that first batch so you don't have regrets. And then if let's say you're close to 40, I always say, just make some embryos just in case, either with your previously frozen eggs or with your eggs right now, just so you still have the option to have a biological child if that's something that's important to you.
And I think that's important too, right? That's kind of like a little caveat. If this is a person who's willing to use donor eggs at some point, they don't have to have the same pressure as somebody who would say, there's no way I would ever do that.
Right. Exactly. And one of my many mantras is freeze your eggs, be your own egg donor.
Absolutely. Well, these are wonderful, wonderful pieces of information for the audience. Have I missed anything, Dr. Aimee, in your...
No, not at all.
Any acronym?
Oh, I have a ton. I have embryo diamonds. I have, so I have the angel method. I have the Hope syndrome. I have, Hope syndrome is about PCOS. It's basically, rather than thinking of PCOS as something that gives infertility, it just educates women about what PCOS is. It's high androgens, ovaries with lots of eggs, periods that are irregular, and eating and exercise should always be important to you to manage it.
Wow.
So it's really
Fantastic.
simple, rather than polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I think I have this all the time. They cause me pain, which is not what it is, as you know. And then angel method is the basic workup that we do for women who have had miscarriages.
And what does that stand for?
Autoimmune, anatomy, and AMH. So that's the A. N is nutrition, genetics, endocrine. So working up like diabetes, thyroid disorders. And then the last one is lifestyle. So looking at your body size, your BMI, your habits, like smoking, for example, drinking.
These are brilliant, Aimee. Wow. These are fantastic. And I'm sure it really makes patients feel so much better to actually have something that they can hold on to, right? Because they feel so out of control in these situations and feel like, how is this happening to me? And to have some framework is probably so reassuring to patients.
Right. To have some direction, to know that there's a plan.
Yeah.
Rather than being told, oh, just keep trying. If you, miscarried 2 or 3 more times, and then I'll think about doing a workup that I'll Google. No.
Yeah. So painful. Right.
Yeah.
And if patients are too depressed or stressed, they can't stay in treatment. So they're not going to be able to get in and stay and have their child.
But if you come to me, I'll make lots of jokes and I'll sing to you.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, I think everyone should call you, Aimee, and give you a try at some of these methods. It's
Thanks,
fantastic.
Lisa.
I'm sure they're so reassured by hearing all of this. It's wonderful.
I do recommend taking one of my classes. So I have classes. It's eggwhisperschool.com. So it's a great way of people to see me live online. They're live Zoom calls. And I kind of go through all my tips and tricks and then answer live questions one-on-one with people who join the class.
So how can someone access that class?
You can access it from my website or eggwhisperschool.com. So that's where you can see all the class listings and sign up for a class that works for you.
And are the classes just this educational information for it, or are they interactive? What are they like?
Both. So it's a course that you can take that has videos and articles. And then with that course comes one live class. That class is about an hour and a half. So it's a didactic lecture by yours truly. And then after I go through my slides, and you can interact with me the entire time, asking me questions, then people like to share their stories and we talk together. It's quite fun for me. And I think people learn a lot by hearing other people's questions and by hopefully getting their own answered as well.
Well, that's great because that is so needed, as you know, and you probably have seen on social media, there's so much misinformation out there.
Right.
And it's so important for people to really understand the truth about what's possible, what isn't, and what they can do about it. Because if they go down the wrong road, before they know it, their eggs are older and they've lost that opportunity. Everyone out there, please take note of that. And how can people find you?
Egg Whisper, everything. That's the best way to find me. Just like you said, draimee.org, draimee.org.
Okay, fantastic. I think we're so jam-packed full of great information. I really
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Anytime.
Really appreciate
Thank you
it.
for inviting me.
So thank you so much for coming, Dr. Aimee. I really appreciate you being here. And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for listening and making the Egg Whisperer Show a part of your weekly routine. To find show notes and a full transcript for this episode, visit draimee.org and look under the blog tab. While you're there, you can find a link for the Egg Whisperer newsletter, which keeps you in the know about fertility news. You can also find Dr. Aimee and the Egg Whisperer Show on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook. If you'd like to learn even more, Dr. Aimee offers classes at the Egg Whisperer School, eggwhisperschool.com, or you can request a consultation on draimee.org. Thank you so much for tuning in and for sharing the Egg Whisperer Show with others. Keep sparkling and have a great day.